I'll be honest with you up front. I do not believe that Michigan is going to beat Ohio State, but it is not impossible for Michigan to do so. As many say, it's with rivalry games, you throw the record books and stats and all of that out the window. That's only true to some point. But there certainly are moments, and you look back at the last 3 years, only one of those was that one that Michigan was expected to win. So with that in mind, is it impossible? No. And do I think that there's maybe some things going on behind the scenes that give me a little bit of added confidence going into the game? A tiny bit. Let's talk about it on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Now, Inside Michigan Football aired yesterday instead of on Monday due to there being the Michigan basketball game. I'm just assuming. I'm not 100 on why, but that's just how I kind of evaluate that. And with that, I listened to a bunch of it, not all of it, more so read kind of a transcript that AI is kind enough to print out for me. And hearing some things from Wink Martindale and Kirk Campbell even Kirk Campbell, give me a little bit of, I guess, hope going into the shoe. Because certainly no one thought I was on this very show, not in this very room, but on this very camera, probably with this very lens, telling you back in, I would say, 2 years and 3 days ago ish, that I had no belief that without a healthy Blake Corum, Michigan was going to be able to beat Ohio State. And they ended up beating him worse than they did in 2021, right? But then at that time, we knew that obviously Michigan had some offensive pieces and obviously was stout defensively under Jesse Minter, that it stood to reason that Michigan had a very strong possibility. This is not that, right? So I'm not trying to say, and that's why I lead off saying I don't expect him to win because, there's going to be these select Buckeyes who love to cut parts of my show out and post them online and be like, look at the dumb thing this idiot said, right? Like, okay, well, watch the rest of it. What did I say? But some of the quotes from the Inside Michigan Football, apologies there. Some parts of Inside Michigan Football, there were some things that were being said that I thought were enlightening. Now, certainly part of it is the fact that Wink Martindale is not going into this game with the, I'm an NFL guy. I mean, good luck, Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, but I'm just so far ahead of y'all. He's not going into that. It actually, and this isn't a good example, and this is also because I've been watching I've been playing Star Wars Outlaws a little bit lately, and I've thus been watching a little bit of kind of going through some of the Star Wars, and I put on, as I was going to bed the other night, The Rise of Skywalker, and so I read this in the same tone. Kylo Ren asks Emperor Palpatine, "What can you give me?" Wink Martindale responds, "Everything." But okay, here's what he said about what worries him about Ohio State. Everything. I mean, seriously, they're just a machine right now offensively, and we know that it's going to be a physical game. To me, that's advantage us in the physicality area. But we have done a great job of patching together a secondary essentially all season. And it's going to be a test because you've got to have some premier guys to go against premier guys. And it's going to be a great, great challenge for us. Right before that, he said, I was really glad to see Amir Hall step up in the Northwestern game. But this game we have coming up, so completely different animal. You know it. They got 3 werewolves out there that we got to try to cover. And it's going to be a great challenge for us. Well, as we've talked about the last few days, it all starts up front. If Ohio State has had a patchwork offensive line, Indiana did a really good job for a time being able to work through that line, but it didn't end up paying much dividends overall. Same thing could be said for a lot of teams. Northwestern for a half. I'd say more like a quarter. Kind of dominated up front, and then Ohio State kind of started to assert itself. You look at Oregon, who pretty much asserted itself all game. Michigan's not on the level. I mean, it's on the level with Northwestern from an offensive standpoint, but the other two offenses, of course, it's not. But it just needs to be able to have enough, right? That's kind of the problem that we sometimes have when we look at games like this, is we compare the statistics, and chances are that's going to give us a pretty accurate idea of how the game is going to go. Yes. But at the same time, it is, what if the game plan works out? What if they, everything kind of built to this? How much did Michigan kind of store up for this game? How much of the in-season stuff, or the preseason, in-season stuff, prepare them for this moment? That brings me to Kirk Campbell. And for some reason, it just kicked me out entirely of where I wanted to be. There we go. Kirk Campbell said something that really interested me. It piqued my interest. And I know we don't have a lot of trust and faith in Kirk Campbell. But he says about Ohio State. Let me get to the most part. In 22, they were really, really aggressive. Last year, they were really back. He's talking about what they did as far as the box is concerned, right? 2022, they really tried to load the box. Last year, they tried to play some more, cover two. I'm not really sure because I wasn't exactly paying attention to like their actual coverages, but they weren't loading the box as much and backing those safeties and linebackers out a little bit. This year, they're back to the middle. They're not as aggressive, not as calm. So they're trying to get kind of a little bit more aggressive and dynamic, but not as much as they were in 22, where they could let up the huge play. So as he's saying, they're not going to play cover zero. Okay. And this continues. This is where this piqued my interest. We're going to end up discussing this on the other end, but let me get to this first. Going to the game plan, we've studied them 365 days a year. We watch them. The GAs, the analysts, always break them down, so we have a good feel of what they're going to do and how they want to do it. So we meticulously put plays in the game plan throughout the season to try to play off them for when we play them. So it's going to be a part of what we do, part of what they don't think we can do, and what we're going to be able to execute really well that we've had in our back pocket for a while. I mean, that's the dream quote, because that's not the quote we've been getting generally from, Sharon last year going into the last 2 years going into the game. It's kind of like, oh, we're going to do what we do, and they have to try to stop us. Jim Harbaugh would say, like, they're a really good team, but, they're going to be really hard to beat, but we're going to be really hard to beat too. So to kind of acknowledge that, like, we've got a little something. That, and coming from Kirk Campbell, again, like I said, I know we don't have the trust and faith in it piques my interest a little bit. What do you know that we don't know, Kirk Campbell? Because that's clearly suggesting that. Let's continue talking about that, but let's do that here in just a moment. But before we do, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I want to note that I'm not trying to sell hope. And that's kind of why I gave you this disclaimer at the beginning. I don't want you to sit here and say, think, and certainly I don't want you to be like, Isaiah said we're going to win. That's not what's happening here. But there's a path. There's always a path, right? Michigan has been giant underdogs to the Buckeyes before and has beaten them. This Michigan team's at least slightly worse than the mediocre Michigan teams of the 90s. And I would also venture to say this Ohio State team is worse than some of those mediocre Michigan teams of the 90s. We'll find out in game how much Ryan Day is the reincarnation of John Cooper. I was going to say John L. Cooper, and that tells you where my head was at. So we'll just call him Ryan L. Smith. I don't know. Ryan L. Day. We'll see, though. And obviously, Ohio State can have that game plan as well. But one of the things that's really struck me isn't just this Kirk Campbell thing, which we're going to talk more about here first, but the amount of respect you're hearing from the Michigan players, and part of that might be like, yeah, we kind of know what we're running into. I don't think that's how they're thinking at all. Hence Josiah Stewart laughing in a reporter's face on Saturday after the Northwestern game. He was do you actually think that you can win this game? He like literally laughed in the reporter's face, said, are you serious? It's like the David Duchovny Zoolander. Are you serious? I just told you. But I think that there's there's just something to this that, and it makes me wonder, why did they start shifting to a little bit more of a pass happy? Part of it is getting guys to, getting defenses to back off. Do you think you saw against Northwestern how that could kind of work to get them to not necessarily hone in as much on the run, understand that you're going to be a little bit more balanced? That allows more opportunities for your running backs. Michigan's running backs can run, of course, if given a non-loaded box. That includes Donovan, who I think people still just are way too down on. He's actually having a better year than he was last year. I know that's not a high bar to clear, but you've seen him have a little bit more of those explosive runs, not quite as much as 2022. But they're going to need Donovan. They're going to need Kalel. Like, it might, we'll see. I think you would like to see them on the field a lot at the same time. But Kirk's comments really make me sit there and say, like, there's something that you've kind of had in your back pocket, I feel. Now, I've felt that before and have been wrong. It's been like the Jabril Peppers pass that elusively never happened, right? In 2018, I remember talking to a colleague who had a really good inside source, and they had told me like they were going to play Ambry Thomas on offense, and Nick Eubanks was the center of the game plan, and all these kinds of things, and you didn't see any of that, right? And I trusted this colleague's reporting and their source to have a pretty good beat on knowing what that actually was part of the game plan. But also there is the psychology aspect of this that cannot be overlooked. As much as we can sit here and say that, yes, it's it's all about X's and O's and Jimmy's and Joe's and all of those things combined, it's also, there's always going to be a psychological element. I do think that Michigan team in 2018 was overall a better team in many ways. The problem is they went in with some ultra confidence, thinking that, okay, we just got to show up and they're going to lay down, and it didn't work out that way. Ohio State is certainly hungry for a win, but Michigan wasn't not hungry for a win then. But there's also, like, they could sit there and watch the tape and be like, oh yeah, we'll beat these guys. And then if Michigan shows up and it's suddenly difficult, if they're not up like 21-3 at halftime and it's more like 14-7, 14-10, or maybe Michigan's got it tied or maybe they got a lead, how does Ohio State react to that? Right? Because that's where things kind of suddenly, you start recognizing Michigan players start being like, we can do this. Ohio State players start being, and coaches start being like, ooh, I've been on this side before. And keep in mind, Kirk Campbell has been as bad as he's been as an offensive coordinator and calling plays outside of a handful. Like, this last game was great. Not just because they won, but because it felt like a cohesively called game for once, as did the Michigan State second half. At least he knows what it takes to beat Ohio State. And you kind of can see in this quote that he has kind of diagnosed some things. And you would expect that, of course. And we'll see how that goes in game. All of the caveats that we've talked about earlier in the week apply, right? Michigan's got to start fast and keep Ohio State from starting fast. The good news is Ohio State has tended not to start super fast a lot of the time. Wonder if I can do this real quick just to kind of make a tangent to see if I can see some things here. I probably can. It's probably not going to go as easy as I'd like, but I do want to kind of. Let me see. This might also work too. Let me check this out. I'm trying. I want to see some stuff about Ohio State scoring. Okay, that's not going to tell me there. Apologies for the kind of just quick tangent that isn't exactly making things great. Split stats. Let's see if I can find this out here. No, it's just got home, road, ranked, unranked, all that kind of stuff. Doesn't have the things that I want there, but what I can do here is take a quick gander into what Ohio State's done. Let's start with the Big Ten schedule. Ohio State beat Michigan State 38-7. They had a commanding lead at halftime, 24-7. So that wouldn't be ideal for Michigan if Michigan's getting the ball back and finding some confidence in the And my battery died on the camera, even though it was full. So that's fun. All right. We're going to continue on. And we're going to do so here in just a moment. All right, that was an unforced error. We're coming back. That was weird, man. I've had the battery die sooner than later, but I've never had a good battery go from full to zero. Okay. There we are. All right. So we said 24 to 7. Let's say Michigan gets the ball back and can count it 24 to 14, right? Like that's doable. It's not great. Iowa was a 7-0 lead for Ohio State going into the half. But then Ohio State scored 21 points in the second half, the third quarter, ended up winning 35-7. So that I remember that game happened the same time, right before the Washington game for Michigan. Against Oregon, Ohio State was, it was 21 points for Ohio State and 22 points for Oregon. So Oregon had a slight lead. I mean, they kind of got going in that game a little bit, right? Against Nebraska, that was a 14-6 lead for Ohio State. Michigan needs to live in that area somehow. That's where it needs to be. They need to keep that score. Ohio State won 21-17. Michigan needs to be somewhere in that region. Penn State against Ohio State. Penn State had a 4-point deficit going into halftime. It was 14-10. So that's again where they need to live. I'm not even going to look at Purdue. Well, actually, I am. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, Ohio State was up 21-0 at the half. Piled on in the second half. Northwestern, again, Ohio State had 21 points all in the second quarter to the 7 points from Northwestern. That was much closer than that score indicates because the errant snap to the punter led to the blocked kick, led to a Ohio State touchdown, right? In after they took over on downs there. And then Indiana, Ohio State was up 14-7. So you need to keep it somewhere in that range, understanding that they can pile on in a hurry. They can, and they almost certainly will. But we've also seen the Michigan defense lately been way better in the second half. The second half adjustments were back, right? That wasn't the case for a little while. It kind of felt like things started getting out of hand in the second half for Michigan at times. Like you look at some games, it was great, right? Like you look at Texas, like Texas did much of, they got one touchdown in the second half, right? Defensively, I mean, you got to do better than holding them to 31 points, right? It's got to probably be more in the 17 range. But nonetheless, you got to play like you did in the second half. But then you look at like Arkansas State, USC, Minnesota, Washington was a tale of both halves, but still the second half. Those games were big struggles in the first half and ended up being better or worse in the second half, rather. It was great in the first, bad in the second. Then you look at the Illinois game, and it was kind of Michigan played mostly okay in the second half, right? They were down 13-7 going into the second half, only to, they didn't score anymore. And, that was just a bad offensive performance. Defensively, you kind of got as much as you wanted to get out of that game. You look at the Michigan State game, Michigan inexplicably went up 9-7 into the second half. And then Michigan outscored them 15-10. And that last touchdown that they had was a little scary. And obviously they drove the field again, but they still kind of held on. You look at Oregon, they had the touchdown to kind of put things up at the end, but otherwise it hold them to a field goal, right? Michigan was in that game, but Oregon had scored 28 to Michigan's 10. So you can't let that happen. The number one team in the country is Oregon. They come to the big house and they go up like that. Ohio State's number 2. You just got to play them closer. Now, there is the other reason why you can have a little bit of hope, and it's just the fact that outside of some of the Jim Harbaugh games, Michigan's always played Ohio State close, kind of no matter what. In the 2000s, the 90s, like I said earlier, in the mediocre Michigan years, Michigan was tending to limp in around like 7-4, right? And then they'd end up beating Ohio State, and who is often undefeated or with one loss. So this isn't like, and you can look at some of the games Michigan's had and say like, well, they probably should have won those games, and they should have played some of the teams that they lost big to a little bit closer, and they've learned from a lot of their mistakes. And I think that wouldn't be inaccurate to say, and that they've kind of at least figured themselves out enough at this point. Like, I think that if you replay that Oregon game right now, it probably looks different. I would say that that's probably accurate. And I think part of that is you've seen Wink Martindale learn some lessons and say like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this and maybe we shouldn't be doing that. I think that maybe the wake-up call for him was halftime against Indiana. Right, because it was like, you know, you sit there and say, okay, I'm losing to Sark and I'm losing to Dan Lanning and I'm losing to some of these guys, you know. But then even though you lose to some other teams like Washington, you're like, you can kind of wipe that away. You lose to Illinois, you can kind of blame that on the offense in some ways. But then you lose to, even as good as Indiana is, like Wink Martindale didn't come to Michigan to lose to Indiana, right? Like you weren't the premier defensive coordinator in the NFL for multiple years to come and lose to Indiana, right? Like that's just not in the playing cards, no matter how good Indiana might be. So I think that changes the calculus a little bit inside of the coaches' rooms, right? And it makes you kind of reevaluate some things, and that's where I think. And again, beating Northwestern, that's a good team. It's not a terrible team, but it's not a great team. I mean, they're not even going to a bowl game, but still, that's still a team that can fight you hard and all of that kind of stuff. So you look at that and you say, all right, we were able to do what we were supposed to do against a team like this. This is what we would have done. I mean, they might not have even done that to Northwestern last year, but like this is what you would hope to see from Michigan. Has Wink learned his lessons? Kirk Campbell called a great game finally, did he learn his lessons? Sharon Moore, like what lessons did you learn and how much did you impact this? How much are you understanding how like 21 will I think forever live? I mean, in the lore of the rivalry, right? In a Michigan completely turned things around. 22 going into Columbus and getting that win when everyone just was, Brian Hartline out there telling you that for 365 days they talked and we sat in silence, right? Like they fully thought like it was their birthright. I'm not convinced that they don't still fully think it's their birthright. So take advantage of that. And Brian Day came out this week and said like the only thing essentially more painful to him than losing to Michigan was the death of his father, which maybe that's part of the problem. I don't know. I understand that's your livelihood and everything like that, but you still have to realize it's a game, right? Like it's just that's taking things a little too far to some degree. I know we all live football to some degree, but like, bro, there's got to be some worse. Either you had to have some worse things happen to you or what? I don't know. But with that in mind, you hope that Michigan's still somehow clear-eyed and Ohio State's still kind of looking through the looking glass. And I think that we've seen that this isn't 2019 where I kind of felt going into the game that year a little bit leery about Don Brown and that they were going to have the same thing happen to him, but still kind of like, all right, well, Michigan's at least peaking at the right time, right? Blowout wins against Michigan State, which was expected. At Indiana, a little less expected, but still very welcome. Passing game was starting to work. Run game was okay. Defense had looked great in those games. So you kind of felt like going into it like, all right, maybe they turn things around. Shea is healthy. Things are looking good. And then blammo, 56-27, right? I don't think that Ohio State is the best team Michigan has faced. Texas has had its issues. I still think Texas is better. Oregon has sometimes been underwhelming. I still think Oregon is better. Michigan's had the benefit of facing both at home. But I also think that if they played Texas today, it would look different. If they played Oregon today, it would look different. I don't know how much different, but I think that just by virtue of things kind of tightening up against Indiana and what we ended up seeing last week against Northwestern tells me that, okay, they've figured some things out. we've seen better play from some of these players that we didn't expect to see a ton from. Amir Hall, Zeke Berry being shifted out to the boundary. They've been playing a lot better, less missed tackles. But they're just going to they're going to get the barrage. They're going to get scored on. They just need to figure out how to keep that at bay. How can they keep those to be field goals? How can they utilize those defensive linemen to really create havoc and still contain Will Howard? And then you hear some of the respect things that come out of the mouths of some of these guys. Talking to Donovan Edwards, he's like, listen, I've formed, one of the great things about this rivalry is I've formed so many friendships on the other side. And Woody Hayes used to say, like, to his players, if you ever need something, that, you can always go to a Michigan guy and he's going to help you out because that's the bond you formed through this rivalry. We haven't heard them talk like this. And like I said, some of it could be like being resigned to some of the fate. I don't think that's how they're thinking. But like, it's a different demeanor. And also with those quotes from both Wink Martindale, like Wink Martindale needed to have a little humble pie, and we're hearing him have that a little bit here. Okay. Kirk Campbell needed a little bit of not the overconfidence we kind of heard, like this is going to be an explosive offense type thing, but just kind of like understanding we have to have a plan that's going to work. And I'm kind of hearing that, like a direction, because that's the thing about Kirk Campbell. We've talked about this whole time. It's been largely directionless. So now suddenly we're getting those things from both of them. The players have been executing lately. The offensive line looked a lot better against Northwestern. Again, caveat, it's Northwestern. It's not Ohio State. But they know, like, when they go up against Ohio State, it's going to be like, whoa, they're doing more good on good in practice. I asked Kenneth Cole about that, and he's like, yeah, we did mostly good on good today. Okay, good. That's because the offensive line needs to be able to go against the Michigan defensive line. It needs to find a ways that it's going to be able to make plays and survive the pass rush and all of that stuff. That's what's going to help them when they're going up against Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Tyleik Williams, Ty Hamilton, all these guys, right? Like that's what they need is to be able to have that. And then the running backs need to be able to make those fits against Cody Simon. And then you just give enough time for Davis Warren to find whoever Denzel Burke is covering and throw it over there. So that's that. All right, we're going to be back. We're going to do a mailbag tomorrow. So get your questions in. Yes, Thanksgiving Day. We'll get it in before the Lions game if, God willing, the creek don't rise. So that'll do it. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.